Thank you. So my name is Constance A Gewa from George Mason University, and I wanted to share with you a study that we conducted. Actually, we're still working on that study and the data, which looked at food environment in and around primary school, children's schools, and neighborhoods in 2 urban settings in Kenya. All right. Okay, I think I'm having trouble with moving this. If you don't mind, I'll stop sharing again just to see what's going on. Okay, I think I'll okay, all right. So our study was conducted in Nairobi and in Kisumu in Kenya, which is Nairobi being our capital city in the country, and Kisumu is the 3rd largest city. And we wanted just to provide an overview of primary school children's food environment. This is because we were concerned, based on the research, overweight and obesity is rising in Kenya right now among school-age children. It's about, studies quote as much as 11 to 17% of children being overweight or obese. So our interest was trying to figure out what is in their food environment when they're in school and when they're back at home. So we worked with 6 public schools. We wanted to restrict to 6 public schools, but in that target schools that target children from low, medium, and high income, and all being public schools. Three of the schools in Nairobi, 3 of the schools in Kisumu, worked within in each city within the same subdivision. And in each subdivision identified within those income levels, which is the school with the highest enrollment. So the school with the highest enrollment in that targeting low income households, and the same for the medium income schools, and then the high income, those that target the high income households as well. So what we did was then, around the schools, we visited food retail outlets and prepared food sources. So those are locations that predominantly serve hot or warm foods within 1 kilometer of the school boundary. And then we had the students within grades 4 to 6. So ages running from about 9, 10, all the way to 12 or 13, identify their residential areas, and the top 3 residential areas in each school, based on the number of students living in those neighborhoods, were then selected for observation purposes. And in each of those neighborhoods, we went to the neighborhood shopping centers and again located retail outlets and prepared food sources located within 1 kilometer of the shopping centers in the neighborhoods. Altogether, we looked at 500 food places, 364 of them being food retail outlets, selling, multiple things from foods and other non-food items, but predominantly not cooked or not hot foods. And then 144 prepared food sources that serve warm or hot foods. 10 of these places were located within the school compounds. And then we also had key informant interviews in 1 city where we talked with school personnel, included principals, health teachers, canteen managers, to learn more about the school-based food offerings. So our process, we did adopt food checklists that had been used in similar studies in Baltimore area in the US, and adapted these checklists to update the foods and the food categories to reflect those in Kenya. We had trained observers. We had 2 observers in each city, assessed inter-observer reliability in 30% of the food places, which were the correlation was quite high, at least 0.97. And then we also then wanted to categorize foods into healthful foods and unhealthful foods. And to do that, we used Kenya's food-based dietary guidelines to guide the process of identifying foods into unhealthful and unhealthful food categories. And then eventually developed what we refer to as healthful food availability scores and unhealthful food availability scores for each food place that was observed. So this gives you an idea of how the food groups that we were working with based on the guidelines, Kenya's food-based guidelines, and examples of healthy foods and unhealthy foods in those groups. And this was based on sugar content, high sugar, whether the sugar content was high energy or energy dense foods, salt content, fat content. So those are the things we based our decisions on, whether a particular food fell into the healthful or unhealthful category. So going back to the types of vendors that we found, the medium and large size vendors we found were most common in the high income neighborhoods and around high income schools. And this was for both cities. And then the smaller sized vendors. So the medium and large sized vendors are places like the grocery stores, the supermarkets, and the mini marts. While the smaller sized vendors are informal vendors, food kiosks, and then individual vendors with maybe just a tray or a stool and offering one food item. Those were considered very small vendors. And those very small and small size vendors were common in low income neighborhoods and around low income schools. When we looked at the healthful food availability scores, we found, when we did the regression analysis, we found that the scores, high healthful food availability scores were significantly higher among vendors with multiple checkpoints. So the larger grocery stores compared to the smaller vendors with just single checkout points, like the individual vendor on the street corner. We also found that they were higher among medium-sized and large-sized vendors, which correlates well to these checkpoints and the small compared to the very small-sized vendors. And then we also found that high availability of healthful foods was also significantly higher in high-income neighborhoods compared to the low-income areas. And a similar pattern was also seen with the unhealthful foods as well. So high unhealthful food availability scores followed that pattern, showing that in terms of variety, you found a high variety of healthful foods and a high variety of unhealthful foods, for example, being in high income neighborhoods or in the larger stores compared to the lower stores, the smaller ones. When we look at the key informant interview findings, we categorized them into priorities. When you look at what are the priorities that they consider when they're offering foods within the school canteens or in the school lunch programs, because out of the 6 schools that we assessed, only 2 of them had lunch programs. The rest had some form of school canteen within the compound. So affordability was a key issue, school children's food preferences, and you could see that they commonly provided foods were things that they fried dough like samosas, mandazis, really energy dense foods, high sugar processed juices, cookies, candy. But also some of the lunch programs did offer some healthful options like green gram stew or watermelons, which was the most affordable fruit during that season. Bottled water was considered expensive and was not available for purchase. So children brought water either brought water from home or they drank from the school taps. And the one thing that was mentioned repeatedly was the food safety and hygiene, which was highly prioritized when offering the foods. In terms of overweight and obesity, Overweight and obesity dietary risk factors were not taken into consideration in food item procurement decisions. Key informants believe that the food served at the canteens were nutritious. They also did not recognize that sugary and fatty foods contributed to overweight and obesity. Key informants did not believe that food purchased at the school canteens could contribute to overweight and obesity. And instead, they attributed the rise in overweight and obesity to foods that children consumed while at home, that children consumed while they were at home, and to inadequate physical activity. And these beliefs were there despite them offering candies and high sugar and energy-dense food items in their canteens. In terms of policies, when we ask questions about policies, they acknowledge the presence of school health policies on issues on food safety, sanitation, and hygiene, and those were being followed very keenly, and also policies to reduce exposure to illicit drugs around the schools. However, they noted that policies on nutrition quality of school-based foods were generally lacking or vague, if in existence. So, just to quickly, what this means for us as we continue to understand the data was, one, being able to recognize the availability of healthful food and unhealthful foods, that it does vary across areas and varies across income of the neighborhood. So what does that mean in terms of policy and policy implementation and support for practices that allow for healthy foods being available across income, across all income levels. And then the importance of development and operationalization of comprehensive school wellness policies, where it's looking at a healthy diet, nutrition quality, going beyond food safety and hygiene, but also what is being offered within the schools that will support healthy living. Then the importance of recognizing various stakeholders. So as we talk to the vendors, but also the parents being important stakeholders in this, in considering policy, the policy process, and both making an operationalization of policy, and canteen managers, just everybody within, and the children, of course, being part of this, recognizing the importance of these different vendors. And of course, this is opening up our eyes to, what is additional research that is needed. So we recognize that this is a relatively small sample. And if we look at a larger sample and in different settings, we get similar results, but also how do we translate these results into action? How do we work with different groups to translate what we are finding in our results into action? So I want to thank our research team, and also just to let you know, we've had a reference, one of the articles that was published recently, if anybody would like to look at that. And thank you.